On this edition of Let's Talk Cincy.
He doesn't guide us right now. By the power of the Holy Spirit.
Where was the arrest? They just let these people drive off and disrespect us and our heritage.
Citizens respond to despicable racist demonstrations in one greater Cincinnati community.
We wanted to make it clear that this community would not be afraid. We're going to stand together and we're going to stand in unity.
From WLWT, this is the Emmy Award-winning show, Let's Talk Cincy. Presented by Western and Southern Financial Group. Put our financial strength behind you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Courtis Fuller, and welcome to Let's Talk Cincy. I am reminded of the words of the world-renowned poet and one-time Lincoln Heights resident, the late Nikki Giovanni. She said, her generation made important changes. She said, we broke down segregation. This generation is living in a non-segregated world, but that does not mean they are living in a non-racist world. Those words have even more significance today after the ugly and evil display of hate that we witnessed in the Lincoln Heights area recently. I sat down with the senior pastor of Lincoln Heights Missionary Baptist Church and talked with him about his clarion call to greater Cincinnati faith leaders, churches, and people of goodwill to speak out, fight hate, and demand answers.
Well, I would first describe it by talking about the text that I received to let me know what was going on. I received two text messages. The first came from a resident of the community who was extremely concerned, who had obviously seen the neo-Nazis on the bridge and sent me a photo and a message saying that I needed to get there as quickly as possible. The other message that I received was from my spouse, who is a teacher at a nearby school, who shared with me that their process for dismissal with their students was being shifted as a result of the presence of the neo-Nazis and a desire to protect the children from any sighting of them. And so that's the way I'd first describe it. When I arrived there, of course, obviously I was angry, I was disappointed in law enforcement at various levels. And I was really in an effort to comfort and console the community, because it was very clear that the community was in an uproar, as they should be, when neo-Nazis, who present an existential threat for sure to an African-American, a historic African-American community. So that's the way I described Friday when I arrived. Obviously, this was a violation of the sacred ground that is this community. It is sacred because I'm a Christian. We believe that all people are God's people, and this is where people dream, it's where they pray, it's where they work, it's where they raise their families, and where they've committed their lives. And so anytime a threat like this, terrorist threat like this, comes into a community, it is a violation of the sacred ground. And so what we went to that bridge to do was to, first of all, reclaim that bridge for community, for wellness, for well-being, for justice, right? But we also wanted to make sure that there was a clear clarion call, as you said, to justice, and that we needed to take some appropriate next steps. One of them was that we needed to organize, that we needed to unify as a community. What you saw Sunday was several churches, several communities of faith, several faith leaders coming together to say we will not tolerate this. And so that's what we wanted to do. And the investigation became the most important next step. We want a full and thorough investigation of what occurred at that bridge.
Yeah, you must shake your head like so many other people, including myself. You know, how are we still dealing and wrestling with these issues? And how do we break free of that? I mean, there's no easy answer to it.
I've asked myself that question several times over this weekend. I don't take joy in knowing that we're still having to do this type of organizing and marching, though I think it is an appropriate response in times like these. But I agree with you. I just cannot believe that we are not only having to use these tactics again, but that we are seeing that type of rise in rhetoric and activity and policy that is calling us to have to do these things again. And so that's very concerning to me as well. I think, first of all, there has to be a full and thorough investigation of what occurred. There are so many rumors. What you saw at that community town hall was the emotion that has spilled over due to those rumors. But I think the second step is that there clearly needs to be some accountability with policing in the Lincoln Heights community. The community does not feel, many in the community, that became clear, but it was clear to me even before yesterday, just working in the community, that many do not feel that the policing that they've seen there has followed a model that cares for the community, a model where there is trust, a model where there's accountability. There's been a lot of talk, as you well know, about the young men who have taken up arms to defend the community, right? Who have stationed themselves to defend the community. And so much conversation has happened about them, but I think the real question needs to be, why do citizens who pay taxes for there to be a police force feel that they need to protect themselves in such extensive ways? That's a question that I think we need to stick with. And it's clear to me that that's the next step. The investigation so that we get answers. If there are apologies that need to be made, if there's accountability that we need to uphold, we will do that. But then at the next step, we need to do a very good job of repairing, if possible, the relationship between the police and the village of Lincoln Heights.
Sacred land was violated.
Yeah.
That's what that was. That was a violation. And when there's a violation of the sacred, we bring God with us back to that place.
Today is the day that people know that Lincoln Heights is unified and not afraid.
Yes. 100 years later, we're still fighting the same battles. White supremacists just marched into our community, waving their symbols of hate, trying to make us feel small, trying to let us, calling us names.
It just won't happen. And that's been one of the goals, is to make sure that the community first, and that was Sunday's goal, we had a moment that could catalyze a movement, right? The moment, of course, there were several moments in Montgomery, Alabama, Rosa Parks being one of them, but there was Claudette Colvin, there was Georgia Gilmore, there were so many other moments prior to 1955. But it was that moment that catalyzed a whole movement, 381 days of a boycott. And I would like to think that Sunday was just a moment that, if we take the appropriate steps to sustain those measures, to sustain that unity, can become the catalyst for a much larger movement that can have a much more robust impact. And that's my hope. I said this earlier, I'm a Christian minister, right? Hope is important to me. Faith is important to me. If I lose faith in humanity, then I've got the wrong job, right? I have to believe that there is a better way, and that if we really care, and I think that's the question, do we care enough to commit ourselves to the things, as the old prayer says, that make for peace? It is not enough to simply talk about hope. We need to do the work, the constructive work, the deep work, the truth-telling work of being a hope, which sometimes means answering hard questions and being willing to encounter old systems. And white supremacy, right? I mean, because that's what this is about. We have to be honest about that. Neo-Nazis are white supremacists. White supremacy in this country must be rooted out, but to do so is going to take an incredible amount of work, not only systemic work, but it's going to take heart, mind, and soul work as well. But it is the work, as Katie Cannon says, the work that our souls need. Or else we're going to continue to have moments like this where our babies cannot be safely dismissed from school at 2:30 on a Friday without encountering swastikas and AR-15s and signs that refer to them as the N-word. That's not the place. I don't believe that that's all we can be. But we got a decision to make. Will we be more? At our highest levels, we've got to change this rhetoric. We must change these policies. We must change this evil behavior if we're going to be more. And I think we can be.
My final question is, I thought about you getting the call or the text or something about this, because you've seen hate rear its ugly head in, sadly, a very violent way, lives taken when you were in Buffalo.
Yes.
And did that go through your mind?
Absolutely. I've only received 2 text messages of the kind I received on Friday about what occurred at the bridge in my life. And the last time I received a text like that was on May 14th of 2022, when a white supremacist gunman walked into a grocery store on a Saturday afternoon and shot and killed 10 innocent people. So this notion that these things are not serious, right? That this is just the way it works, that this is simply free expression protected by the Constitution. We've got to rethink that. It's more to it than this. This type of rhetoric does eventually lead to violence. And that's my concern, if we don't have some common sense about these things, if we don't do a better job with this, if we don't construct policies, somebody is going to get hurt. And it's going to become a regular part of our culture, which I would argue it already has, to see these types of violent acts in our communities. We must stop this.
I was deeply disturbed, as I think most people were when they saw it. It's hate speech, and they didn't have a permit, so they shouldn't have been there. And when your intent is to intimidate, that's not protected speech. And that is my sense, that their intent was to intimidate.
Welcome back, everyone. We've heard from many voices outraged about what took place. The NAACP actually released a statement that said, in part, this is not normal and should not be accepted. We are stronger together, and we are calling on all to unify against this behavior. I talked with the president of the Cincinnati NAACP about this situation.
Well, I mean, our position is, we don't want to empower hatred. We don't want them to be in the limelight because of their foolishness. But what we do want is to recognize all the strength and unity that came out of that episode, and the fact that the community of Lincoln Heights came together and said, we're not going to accept hatred, we're not going to be intimidated, we will push back. There's not a quick fix, because it wasn't a quick method of how we got here. We've gotten here through a lot of troubling legislation and the appearance that it's okay to be hate-filled. So that's what we are combating. And when you start dealing with that type of culture, that type of environment, then you have to change it within first and push back at what's taking place. There's a lot of bad stuff that's coming down the pipeline that's being perceived by races as empowerment. They feel emboldened. They feel as if it's their opportunity to come out from behind the closet and just show that, we hate you for no reason.
It is very troubling that we get stuck in the mud in this, on this issue, why people can't get along.
Yeah.
And then it's troubling to see, like you said, I mean, laws and legislation pushing people away from each other instead of toward each other.
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like the stories that my grandparents told, and I never wanted to feel that way. I never want my kids or my grandchild to feel that way. And that's why the NAACP is fighting so hard to make sure that we cannot see this again. We have to stomp it out. We have to stay, vigilant in doing the things that we've been doing. Our focus right now was on education and making sure our educational system is doing the things to help support our community and our students. And this is just a detour away from, that agenda. But it's a long-term fight, and we just have to stay in it. I'm just getting the baton to keep running the race, and then someone will get it after me, but we're going to keep running the race. Life is not a spectator sport. You have to be engaged in the change that you want to see. And we invite people to volunteer. We have 17 different committees, And we're out there doing the best that we can. These are all volunteers that are using up their time, their energy and their resources, their expertise to try and help our community. And people think it's always somebody else's job. It's always, well, they'll take care of it. Well, you are part of that somebody. Everyone is somebody. And when the community is calling for somebody, they're calling for you.
But you had the bus going around, the voter registration bus. So it would appear that you did just about everything you could possibly do to engage the community in voting and understanding the issues. And I would imagine that you're not going to stop, but I could imagine that it feels a little frustrating, because I know it feels frustrating to me.
It feels frustrating when you hear people not understanding the basics of civics, understanding that there's 3 branches of government. Now, it may be a little confusing now because of the way they're blending, but that's very frustrating. When you've been out there on the pavement, you're trying to get to everywhere. Our mobile unit is state of the art. It's something that's hasn't been done anywhere else. And we've been trying to get out there as much as possible. So yeah, there is some frustration. There is some times when I wake up in the middle of the night like, Lord, what else can I do? But you stay encouraged when you see some new voter. That's where it inspires me to keep getting back out there, because these young kids are now being interested and engaged. And then you get the older people. I had a person that had never voted before. She was 70 years old and had never voted. And that shocked me, but she needed a reason to vote. And that's what we have to do, is keep on educating people on the reason why they should be voting. There's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of components going on, and different components throughout the city of different people trying to organize. I know they're doing organization up at New Prospect. I heard in regards to a lot of ministers, even our religious committee chair, Bishop Tate. We just convened on a meeting this Monday in regards to looking at things. But for me, my strategy is not necessarily marching. And I stated this in Lincoln Heights yesterday. I will march with you anytime you want to march. But we have to have our next steps. And our next steps has to be with volunteers helping educate kids so they learn how to read, so they can understand their history. It has to be the next steps of trying to have economic empowerment. There's $3 billion about to come into the city, and for the infrastructure of the highway. We need to be a part of that. We need to be understanding how we can have people that have construction backgrounds, how people can have those small businesses. I mean, these are all the components that need to take place in order to make ourselves included in this process. There has to be next steps. We have next steps, but we need people to volunteer. And if you're willing to volunteer, we have assignments for you. But there's, once again, as you were talking about the voting thing, there's only so much my small group can do. We are better when we work together. And it's not just black people. Black people are the ones that seem to get the grunt of it. So if we solve the black issue, we solve the issue for everybody. And we need other people to get involved, because it's not whether or not it's going to affect you, it's when it's going to affect you. So we have been really strong on the national scale in the court system. And then any legal aspects or things that I do has to come through the national. So I have to petition to them in order to move and solicit legal action.
Have you gotten feedback on this situation?
We're working on it. I don't want to divulge any things so that people can already be blocking it before it comes. But yeah, there's conversations being had in regards to things to do. A lot of it is, are you adhering to your policy? I talked to the sheriff, which I think was a wonderful thing for, the sheriff to come out there and actually listen to the people and find out, that doesn't happen all the time. But policy is always where the issues are.
We're sitting back and ignoring the growing hatred that's coming into our communities and thinking that there would be no backlash. Folks, our country's spiraling out of control.
Yeah, you know, we also heard from the Jewish Federation of Cincinnati, making it clear hate is not welcomed in our community. Here's more now from Lindsay Stone.
Guys, it ain't worth it.
And while we see so much hate going on, the fact that it was in our own community and so visible was frightening and infuriating.
In a one-on-one with CEO of the Jewish Federation of Cincinnati, Danielle Minson, she described her disbelief Friday as nearly a dozen people waved swastikas over an overpass in Lincoln Heights.
The display of Nazi symbols from white supremacists is frightening. It's got no place in Cincinnati, and it's really an attempt to instill fear. And these are violent, aggressive symbols. And so when you see that, you feel threatened, and we're not going to accept that.
Minton says for the Jewish communities, protecting themselves and staying vigilant have become a reality.
We have to be very aware to make sure that we are looking at who's coming to our events in a very different way than in the past. And we are very aware that if we see something, we need to say something and alert law enforcement.
How y'all gonna let them come in our community and do this, man? They are allowed to protest.
Some community members have been outspoken about law enforcement's lack of police action.
I do believe that it was a really frightening and tenuous situation. When there are neo-Nazis that have weapons, the job of the police is to try to reduce any threats. And so I believe that they were doing what they could to try to reduce and defuse the situation. There were two things that were very alarming for me. One, there were children on a school bus that saw this, and I can't imagine the trauma associated with this. The second is that this is a neo-Nazi group that went into a predominantly black neighborhood to try to instill fear and intimidation, and that is not acceptable. The Jewish community stands in solidarity and support of the residents of Lincoln Heights, and we certainly are encouraging conversation and to work with elected officials in Lincoln Heights, with faith leaders, and with community representatives. You know something, I think this is just a continuation that we need to make sure that we are vigilant. We need to make sure that we have safety protocols and procedures in place. We need to make sure that we work in partnership with law enforcement, and we need to make sure to educate our community members that if they see something, they should say something, and that we are going to be our best protection against the haters.
And finally today, James Baldwin might have said it best. In a 1962 New York Times essay, he said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." Well, that does it for the program today. Thanks for joining us. I'll see you next time for another edition of Let's Talk Cincy. Until then, have a good day and a better day tomorrow.